Good morning, everyone. I hope you guys had a great week last week. My family and I had a really good time socially distancing at the beach. All we pretty much did was play games, read books, and go out the back door of the condo we rented to the beach and then right back in again. But it was great. It was a restful time and decent weather most of the time. But now it's time for me to get back into the Rollo Devos, Psalms lessons, preaching this week, things like that. It's going to be a busy week, but it'll be nice to get back into the swing of things. Now, what better way to get back into the swing of things and get back into Rollo Devos than with a Narnia lesson, right? Or at least a Narnia illustration. And you all know that I love the Narnia books. And probably the most neglected of the Narnia books is The Horse and His Boy. And I think that's a tragedy because it's really the best of the books, in my opinion. It tells a side story in the land of Narnia that happens during the golden age of Narnia when kings Peter and Edmund and Susan and Lucy, or Queens Susan and Lucy, were ruling in Narnia as young adults, and everything was wonderful. And it tells the story of a horse named Bree and his boy named Shasta. And then a couple of other characters, Hwin, another horse, and Aravis, a young girl fleeing from the land of Calormen. One of the reasons that I love the story is that it shows God's providential control over all that's going on. And remember, we learned about a while ago, but not sure how long ago it was, but we learned what providence is. And providence is God using his sovereign power for the good of his people, to control all that's happening for the good of his people and the glory of his name. And this book shows us that in so many ways. In fact, near the very end of the book, Shasta explicitly talks about it. When he's sharing a story with Aravis. Aravis and Shasta are reunited, and he's telling her the story of how he's actually the long-lost son of King Lune of Archenland. And he brings that story to close by saying, he, Aslan, seems to be at the back of all the stories. Aslan seems to be at the back of all the stories. That is, Aslan is behind them all, guiding them all according to his plan. And you know, that is true of our God himself. He is at the back of all the stories. And all of our stories, all the stories in God's word lead us back to him. I mean, Exodus certainly does, because it shows us God fighting for his people to redeem them from slavery. They thought that he wasn't hearing them at all, but he was working behind the scenes all the time for their salvation. First, he was working to raise up Moses and to bring him away from Egypt, so that he could train him to be the man that he needed to be to lead them out of Egypt. And then he worked through the plagues to show them his glory, to show Pharaoh and Egypt his glory, to defeat Pharaoh and all their false gods. He worked through the angel of death and the Passover to keep them alive and to show them how his salvation would work one day through his son. He worked as he brought them out of Egypt. He worked as he helped them cross the Red Sea by parting it so they could cross on dry land, and then the Egyptians get drowned when they try to follow. And he works as he continues to work in the second part of the story as he sustains them in the wilderness. One of the things we talked about several weeks back, probably 2 or 3 weeks back now, is that the wilderness part of the story is now the part of the story that teaches us about the Christian life. The Exodus, the redemption from slavery part of the story, teaches us about our salvation. Then as the Hebrews go into the wilderness, God starts to change the picture, and he starts to teach us about how he sustains us and makes us more holy in the Christian life. Once they were saved, the Egyptians, they weren't immediately taken into the promised land. They were taken into the wilderness, because there God makes them more holy. He sanctifies them. God does the same for us. I mean, once we're saved by putting our faith in Jesus, we're not immediately taken into heaven. God keeps us here in the wilderness of this life. He does that to make us more and more like Jesus as he works through all the difficult things that go on, as he is always at the back of all the stories. He's constantly working at the back of all the stories for his glory and for our good. That's what we saw in the last story we looked at a little over a week ago now, in Exodus chapter 16, what we ended with the last time. God provides them with manna to sustain them in the wilderness. He gives them everything they need to sustain them in the wilderness. But he doesn't do it just to shut up whiny children who wanted food. He does it to show them his glory again and again. God provides us spiritually through Jesus Christ. He provides us Jesus himself to sustain us spiritually in the wilderness of this life. And he also does that to show us his glory. He does it to show us that he's always at the back of all the stories. He was at the back of the story when Adam and Eve fell from perfection and made all the rest of us sinners. He's been at the back of the story the whole time of the Old Testament while the faithful saints continued to look forward to the Messiah that would one day come. He's at the back of the story when Jesus comes on to earth at the exact right time for the salvation to come and to spread throughout the world. He's at the back of the story when Jesus is killed by the hands of sinful men. He's at the back of the story when Jesus is raised from the dead. He's at the back of the story when the apostles spread the gospel and wrote down the New Testament for us. He's been at the back of the story for the entire history of the church, the good things and the bad things. He's at the back of the story of your life as well. He's always at the back of the stories. That's how one of the ways God shows us how glorious he is, when we see that he's always working in every part of the story. No matter what's going on in the wilderness of this life, he is always at the back of all the stories. So you guys think about that. And tomorrow we'll continue the story of the Exodus, seeing more about this Christian life. Talk to you then.